Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen. And this is just while we wait for people to join. I've just put together some slides based on information that it's all in the public domain, and it outlines the details of the gas to shore project. So the scope is defined there in the bottom para that's highlighted. And then this is a description of the components. Now the source for each slide is up in usually the top right-hand corner. And it says where I got it from and what page and so on. And this is just because I think even though it's something that's much discussed, we don't always perhaps have a handle on the detail. So while we're waiting, it just seemed useful to share it. So the pipeline's going to transport up to 50 million cubic feet per day of gas. And these are the routes. And it's going to be about 200 kilometers long. This is the route from the shoreline to Wales. We see the Demerara River on the right there in brown. These are the plans for the gas. So we start on the left with the gas out at sea, and then we run through all the stages there. This is a schematic of the length of time that the project is estimated to last. Scheduled to complete it in 2024. Obviously, it's a massive project, so one presumes that could change. And this is just some information again that's out there in the public domain. This was the presentation, the press conference, I think, in April. These figures came from. And then a more detailed analysis of price per kilowatt hour. And then these are some of the variables which exist in the other studies. This I found particularly interesting because in the UK, this is something that we're suffering from at the moment. The price of natural gas has rocketed, so it can happen. And then these are just, again, some of the environmental considerations, which we won't really be looking at this evening, but we will certainly be looking at in a future panel on the gas to shore. And this is from one of Exxon's summaries. And you can see there's quite a significant list there. And there were several pages of these possible effects of the project. I only selected one by way of illustration. And again, this is from the EPGL project summary. And then these are the studies that have been done to date. Good afternoon to our audience in Guyana and North America. Good evening to those joining us from the UK. On behalf of Moray House Trust, welcome to our panel, Gas to Shore, the Pros and Cons. For those joining us for the first time tonight, Moray House Trust is a private, non-partisan, non-profit based in Georgetown and dedicated to promoting Guyanese culture and public discourse. My name is Isabel de Caries. I'm the Chair of Trustees at Moray House Trust and the moderator for this event. A warm Guyanese welcome to our regulars. A word about the format. We start with a brief presentation from each panelist. There's a short interlude where members of the panel can question each other. After this, there's an opportunity for the audience to ask questions. Please keep your questions brief if you can. A word about the purpose of these panel events. Our aim is not to promote or to endorse a particular view. Our aim is to facilitate an exchange of views, preferably grounded in research or expertise. In matters of public policy or where a huge project is proposed, such as this one, it is desirable to have a public official on the panel to clarify strategy or policy. Once again, we invited technocrats within the administration to participate. One declined immediately. The other took over a week to seek guidance on whether he could participate before concluding yesterday that he could not. Anecdotal evidence from other civil society groups suggests that this experience is not unique. This begs several questions. Is the administration unwilling to engage civil society on matters as trifling as $1 billion project in an area in which no one in the country has any prior expertise? To engage civil society is not the same as giving a press conference or offering a briefing. It involves communicating, listening, perhaps even considering other perspectives. Are the legally prescribed forums the only form of engagement that we're going to have? That's one question. And the other is that if senior officials are unable to speak in a forum such as this one without securing permission, what capacity do they have to make day-to-day decisions? Tonight's discussion about the Gas to Shore project will therefore represent the views and concerns of members of civil society. None of our speakers will profess any particular expertise on gas or pipelines or power plants. They have simply assessed some of the information in the public domain and framed some questions or comments. My final comment is about the quality of information available in the public sphere. Remarkably, it seems that this particular project, conceived under the previous administration and amplified by the current one, has been the subject of a mere handful of studies to date. To state the obvious, this is the largest infrastructure project ever undertaken in Guyana by an order of some magnitude. Even the few studies undertaken do not build a straightforward and coherent narrative. In other words, there isn't a clear plan. Also, we continue to suffer from an acute lack of baseline data, for example, as regards fish stocks in zones likely to be affected. This makes an accurate assessment of cause and effect difficult. And in one of the slides I showed earlier, there was actually a statement there predicting that there may be, in one of the EEPGL documents, predicting that there may be an effect on fish stocks, on marine life in areas. And we're seeing we've just seen recently in the papers discussion about how the fishermen are suffering and that the catch is down. So there is much to consider. Without further ado, I will hand you over to John Palmer, who's transferring some of the skills acquired in another sphere of our natural resources, our forests, to assess this proposal, the gas to shore proposal. John.
So I hope that everyone can see this first slide. If you just tell me that you can or can't.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm a forester. I mostly work on quality assurance schemes and audits. And what I really look at is for inconsistencies in the information provided and gaps in the information, particularly when it comes to difficult questions where the person being checked doesn't really want to say what's going on. So I'm very interested in this particular situation in Guyana. And we're just going to cover a few questions arising. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, it says, my brother's a petroleum engineer, but I can tell you he's very reluctant to be drawn on these matters. So I'm going to deal with just four particular observations. Context, the demand, is there enough gas, and is the pipeline safe? So petroleum, it's not a manufactured product, it's natural. And Guyana has been taxing with royalties and rentals, other natural resources, gold and diamonds, bauxite, rainforest timber for decades. So Guyana's got lots of experience of how to set such taxes. But as a foreigner, what I found very odd was that Guyana has actually allowed the oil companies pretty much to decide what license fee they're going to pay, what area rental they're going to pay, what royalty they're going to pay. And we have at least 3 times the honorable ministers from the previous administration who went twice to Texas and have reported back that they didn't actually negotiate. And the result of that is, as a foreigner, an extraordinary situation that there's a possible difference of $55 billion spread over 40 years between what Guyana could expect as revenue from a normal production sharing agreement and the production sharing agreement signed with Exxon in 2016. Let's look at demand. Guyana, at one time in the mid-1990s, was globally famous as being in the forefront of development of national development strategies. 200 people contributed, 40 chapters were written, 6 volumes were published, and it's still a model of its kind. Chapter 39 dealt with energy. Of course, it didn't really deal with petroleum because that wasn't born or thought of. But what is interesting is how often in the NDS chapters, there are protests and I was going to say complaints, but perhaps just protests that the electricity generating system was already then in the mid-1990s pretty antiquated. There were lots of blockouts then, just as there are now. And that the reticulation grid, that's how the electricity was distributed, was even then thought to be pretty inadequate. So whatever is now generated by new projects has still got to also cope with the need to spend a lot of money on effectively a new grid. And this is true whether you're going to rely on the Myla Falls or whether you're going to use this interim solution of a gas to shore project. Now, when I'm reading through the documents, I can see from this 1997 version of a policy, a revised draft released in 2017, prepared by a consultant from the Inter-American Development Bank, discussion on that draft running into 2019, and then most recently that I could find, GPL, Guyana Power and Light, itself producing new forecasts for demand, which considerably increase what it thinks is the current demand, somewhat unsatisfied, and a rapid increase in further demand. So as an interim solution, while Guyana has signed up to various international conventions, such as the Paris Agreement of 2015 and making statements to the COP26 at Glasgow last month, it's clear that a gas to shore project could provide a very useful halfway house contribution to modernizing the power supply. But as I say, it needs to be supplemented by work on the reticulation grid. So the question then is there enough gas to do this? The Production Sharing Agreement, Clause 12 from 2016, the EIA produced by ERM in 2017, and all subsequent EIAs, I think this is a very important point, all subsequent EIAs agree that the principal use of the associated gas is reinjection to maintain reservoir pressure. The EIA, together with Exxon, of course, looked at possibilities. We either burn it all off, as is done in some countries, we re-inject as much as possible, or we sell it. But Exxon is already a major retailer of gas coming from the numerous wells with very cheap gas derived from fracking in North America. So Exxon decided it absolutely wasn't worthwhile trying to sell gas from these offshore wells of Guyana because the cost of turning it into usable, marketable gas in international markets was simply not worthwhile when everyone could get hold of fracked gas much more cheaply. So the Exxon decision was, no, we will re-inject everything that we don't need to power the turbines on the FPSOs, the floating production, storage and offloading vessels. Now, in this particular gas to shore project, we're only looking at the outputs from two fields, Liza 1 and Liza 2. And on Liza 1, 20 million standard cubic feet of gas is enough to power the turbines per day. 180 comes up the pipe together with the oil, and that leaves, and also we're maintaining pressure by injecting seawater. Now, as we know from many reports produced by Exxon and protests by the gas compressor manufacturers, SBM Offshore, as the operator of the FPSO, had continual difficulty almost from the start of oil production in December 2019. So we have a remarkable situation that no less than 578 days, the compressors weren't working properly, with an average flared gas of 16 million cubic feet a day. Of course, you do need to flare off some gas because you have to keep constant pressure in the pipes anyway. What you don't want, as in old gas cookers that I certainly remember from my childhood, you had to keep the pilot light light because you did not want to have a nasty explosive mixture of gas and air in the pipe. So maintaining 1 million Stanley cubic feet as a flare is international convention, but that doesn't explain, we haven't heard of what's happened to the balance. 180 produced up the pipe, 20 burnt off to power the turbines on the FPSO, an average of 16 flared off while we're fixing the gas compressors. That means you've got 144 million Stanley cubic feet, which hasn't been mentioned. Now, I'm assuming that SBM did manage to pump that down into the reservoir again, but it hasn't been mentioned, and it seems odd that the EPA doesn't seem to have asked about this or reported on it. So that's a puzzle. However, Exxon has told the government of Guyana at least twice, very firmly, in October 2016, and again in August 2018, that yes, we have gas to spare. Now, how they got gas to spare if they've been re-injecting it isn't clear to me. That's something that civil society might like to question more intensively. And Exxon says we can provide 30 million Stanley cubic foot per day for 15 plus years, or if you like, we can have 50 million Stanley cubic feet per day for 12 plus years. And again, it seems odd that no one has asked an independent auditor to come along and check that these values are consistent with, at the same time, re-injecting all spare gas back into the reservoir. 30 million Stanley cubic feet per day would be enough to provide 188 megawatts. Or if we go to the higher level of 50 million a day, that would generate 250 megawatts. So that's about half the projected demand for 2035. I have to say that there are a variety of estimates of demand in the documents which are provided by the Department for Public Information from different consultants engaged by the previous political administration. And that this really confuses things because all these consultancy documents have said it's very difficult for us to give you reasonable estimates of what the cost is going to be because we haven't got the engineering and technical plans from Exxon about how exactly they would take the associated gas and put it through the pipe. We do know that it would cost about 93 million to adjust I was going to say rebuild, but certainly re-engineer part of the FPSO in order to produce a good, consistent pressure in the pipe running from the shore, running to the shore. And in the evaluations which have been done in the consultancy documents, the estimates of whether this is an economically or financially worthwhile exercise has been compared with the current use by GPL of heavy fuel oil. It's not a comparison with hydro or solar or wind power, and I'm sure the other two presenters today will talk about those. So a minimum sale price of 9 US cents a kilowatt hour will earn a basic internal rate of return of 10%, which is about the basic minimum which any commercial enterprise would need to justify the investment. The lifetime of the pipeline of a refinery, a fractionator, is about 20-25 years, which is coincident with the expected lifetime of the Liza 1 and Liza 2 fields. So that's rather neat. You use up all the spare gas, if any, and that gives you 20-25 years to work out how the renewables would come into operation instead, as the Honourable President has declared at COP26 in Glasgow. And you had a good presentation by the former Minister, David Patterson, at the Moray House webinar on 2nd of October, which I have to say I found very illuminating. So you would be using gas which is free. After all, it's Guyanese gas, and all Exxon is doing is supplying the gas. But if I understand rightly, Exxon is actually proposing to sell you your own gas while pumping it through the pipeline. So that's another thing you might like to question more intensively. why on earth are you paying for the gas, which is yours in the first place? The last point I just want to go over is the pipeline safe? It's 200 and I'm only dealing with the offshore portion. 200 kilometers of 12-inch pipeline is enough to transport up to 145 million standard cubic foot per day of gas, and Exxon says it could find indeed that amount. If you look at the EIAs, one of the things which is really striking is how careful Exxon is in setting the SURF elements of the oil fields. That is the subsea manifolds, pumps, pipes, monitoring apparatus. It drills down, it's the same as you do onshore. It drills down, it puts in strong foundations, and it sets those apparatus on firm foundations and locks them in place. But so far as I can see, the pipeline, which of course has to go from the gas field up the slope of the continental shelf, then along the top of the continental shelf to the shore of Guyana, that pipeline apparently isn't going to be anchored at all. It's just going to be laid flat. It's not going to have any special coatings or its armorings. It's not going to be set inside a concrete culvert. I find this really very odd, especially because, as we also know from the EIA, the currents running through the Liza 1 field were so strong that when they were trying to do baseline surveys of the fish, they couldn't set the fish traps because the current just was sweeping them away. But nevertheless, the pipe apparently is going to be laid without foundations. The pipeline must cross the mobile mud banks. Now, as you know, living in Guyana, you go to the seawall and you don't see lovely sandy beaches and blue water. You see the traditional muddy Guyana current. And this moves constantly from east to west, carrying the Amazon mud. The banks are enormous, gigantic, moving banks, 4 to 40 kilometers long, and they move at a speed of up to 1,300 meters a year, east to west. This is an immense amount of water, an immense amount of mud. Now, if you're just going to lay the pipe on top of the mud or in a little shallow trench, surely the mud is going to be bending the pipe into arcs. It's a bit like if you look at you stand on the seawall and you look at the pin seines of the fishermen, the current moves those fishing nets into arcs. And it seems to me that this long, unanchored pipeline is also likely to be bent into arcs. And it's only a thin wall pipeline. Indeed, some of the commentators have noted that it's only 1-inch steel which has been proposed. It's carrying highly inflammable gas under pressure. And I would have thought this was a real hazard, but it's not much discussed in the press. This is what happens if you lay a pipe when you don't anchor it, you bend it, and indeed it then splits. And guess what? All the gas comes fizzing out. It's not that this is a new problem. Seabed pipelines have been rusting and getting bent in elsewhere, and Trinidad has reported literally hundreds of leaks from old, rusted, bent pipelines which have been damaged. And I think Guyana really needs to look carefully as to the management of this pipeline. Some of the pipelines closer to the shore will be laid in a shallow trench. And remember that GPL has expensive experience of its power cable, which it laid across the estuary of the Demerara River. And this cable was laid poorly and superficially. And guess what? An anchor hooked onto it and broke it. And it cost $500,000 US to repair. A team had to be flown in from China with special expertise and equipment to mend it. So if you're going to be having a pipeline, please bury it deeply enough so that fishermen and other boats with anchors can't damage it. Also, of course, there are experience elsewhere of the mess that can be caused by pipelines carrying mixtures of gas and oil. Remember that you've also got not only gas, in this pipeline. You've also got natural gas liquids. They're going to be extracted and separated in the fractionator. But while they're in the pipeline, you've got this these liquids as well, and you certainly don't want this mess spreading over your shore. And that's all the questions I have to say in this presentation. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for that. We'll move on to Fred Collins now, who is the president of Transparency International Guyana, Inc. Fred, over to you.
Thanks, Isabel. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I need to try to share my screen. I'm going to do that right now. Let's see. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good afternoon again. And I must say that I found that presentation by Mr. Palmer very interesting and amusing at points. And I want to let him know that when I look at him, I'm remembering another John Palmer who has been a part of my village for decades. And of course, he's a different complexion and ethnicity, but the name, of course, helps to remind me all the time. But you were much more interesting than he was, I must tell you that. So without much ado, let me go to the next, let me go to the business of today. Let me see if I am, right. So we are going to be talking about conditions for TIGI to support a gas to shore project. We are not experts, as I'm very glad that Isabel made sure that she pointed out. We are civil society people, and we have had to come to grips with all of most of the issues that we have to be dealing with, that the majority of our fellow citizens seem to have no time for or patience with. They are just interested in the results and how it affects them. So we have consulted the experts in the form of their reports or in publications for the technical parts. And we hope that what we have to say will generate some new thinking. Who is TIGI? Again, we're not technical people, we're volunteers, we serve unpaid, we do not have the resources to do deep analysis. We have done a lot of work in a series of articles on the Exxon contract. You can see those articles at our spunking new website, which we have thanks to help from the Oil and Gas Governance Network. I see one of the directors who has become very valuable to TIGI is on this in this meeting. So I went embarrassing by calling his name, So I want to quote, I'm going to be quoting from one of the first criteria that we're going to be needing. Oh, by the way, when we say support of a gas to shore pipeline, the indefinite article is very important. The gas to shore, our conditions under which we are going to be supporting a gas to shore pipeline. And we're speaking about in general. We are not speaking specifically of this gas to shore pipeline as designed. And I don't think that from what I heard just now that a previous speaker, while he certainly identified some specific issues of the selection, I think he was also general in some ways. But we are going to be more general than that. And we are saying conditions under which we will be prepared to support a gas to shore pipeline. And those conditions are not met, I can tell you that in general. So we are going to be quoting, first of all, we need a just transition. We need to see the gas to shore project, and I thought I would have thought exactly, though I didn't know that. It's intuitive what Isabel said, that this GTS, let me call it GTS, it's a lot of syllables, gas to shore project, is going to be the largest infrastructure project that we would ever have undertaken. And so we are saying it must be part of a strategic approach. It must be part of what is called a just transition, an equitable transition from the regime that we have now, which is a fossil fuel-based regime, to one of green energy. And I'm going to be quoting from this gentleman whose picture you see here, from a company called Enlic. And he says, it's widely accepted that the energy transition involves a seismic change in the landscape of the sector on a scale not seen since origins of a centralized power grid. He said increasingly competitive renewable energy sources are usurping fossil fuels and reducing the industry's impact on climate change. That's nothing new to you. And he said, however, the uprooting of traditional business models risks adverse consequences. So this transition must be carried out in a way that achieves its goals, while at the same time minimizing negative impacts. To deliver a just transition, it will be necessary to play fair by those whose livelihoods and environments are impacted. Most obviously, those employed in the shrinking, well, in their case, they're talking about coal mining industry, and those working in coal and nuclear generation. Plus, there needs to be a recognition of how the transition affects different geographical regions. And finally, there must be a focus on repurposing and reskilling in a way that creates new industries and new jobs. All of this points to the fact that we are talking about something that should have been done and should be done in case of any large project like this in the context of a wider strategically oriented approach. So criteria number one for us is just transition. It implies that it must be part of a transition strategy. Ending fossil fuel power production is going to result in the loss of millions of jobs worldwide. We must ensure that a greater number of new jobs are created by the transition to green energy. And that accords perfectly with Article 38 of our own Constitution, which says, to ensure that Guyana is a democratic state with a healthy economy, the state shall provide appropriate support to any group which is or is claiming to be under threat of marginalization. I find these words particularly interesting and amazing, given that there are no statistics which we have which monitor for the benefit of the population any kind of threat to marginalization. But this endeavor and what we're seeing in the fishing industry is certainly going to be marginalizing, is threatening to marginalize our fishermen. So who else is going to be marginalized? All of that, when we are going to be going on projects like these, needed to be examined in detail as much as is possible in advance. The desk study, we're going to be referring to Energy Narratives Revised Final Report, which Mr. Patterson, of course, will be familiar with. Oh, by the way, I did not have the privilege to be at that presentation of his, though I might have liked to be, but I'm sure his ears will be ringing when I mention this, because this was done under his watch, or part of his watch. So this desk study, as it is termed, we'll be making reference to it, and it was dated June 2017, which is 4 years ago, which is a long time the way developments are being made, because it did touch on the potential for certain new technologies which were in promise at that time, and apparently some have materialized. So one of the things of the desk study is it touches upon public-private partnerships as a structure that is recommended. And we want to say we don't agree. We do not agree, because this is usually a way to privatize the benefits and socialize the costs. This is the kind of thing that we're seeing all around the world. When these guys get together, as we have seen dramatically in the United States, the fancy, quantitative easing and so on, what it did on a massive scale is to take money from the poor and give it to the rich with the promise that it is going to continue to trickle down. but that's another story. This is not just in the United States. So we are not too enamored by any recommendation for any public-private partnership. We're going to say a little more on that, but at this point, we'll say it should be a model that has share ownership, that is open to all Guyanese. At least they should have the opportunity to invest. They can decide they don't want to, but they must have the opportunity to. And those Guyanese can be abroad as well. Oh, we know that there are more of us now outside than in. And all investors must be available to the public. Criteria number 2, we noticed from an article in the Starbuck News, I think it was in July when the ad was placed, that there is it was put to tender, or about to be put to tender, for the service was going to be, it appears to us to be a combination of design, construction, and finance. Well, as we're saying here, as you see here, we would prefer that those things should have been different. First of all, there should have been a tendering for the design, because there seems to be a multiplicity of combinations. Then the construction, and then the finance. The same group who is going to be doing all of these things together, it seems to us, has an incentive to maximize the finance and minimize the quality. But that's just our simple minds. We are not as bright as the persons who thought this up. So we would say that just like how you do it in the case of construction of a building, you have your architect who is going to do the designing, and then you do your bills of quantities, and you let somebody do the quoting for that, and so on and so forth. Next, what about these design options? Are they really design options? The desk study itself suggests so, and it did say that one option is barges, and it did consider the employment costs. And this is one point we're going to make, that we are not enamored of models that are going to be heavy on technology, and the labor costs, the labor benefits, however you look at it, go somewhere else. And we are left here, our people have no employment. And even when, as Mr. Palmer just mentioned, it's time to repair it, we're flying somebody from China to fix it. Now, that doesn't seem like common sense to us. And we're looking at this thing from a common sense standpoint. We know these guys who did thought of these things are much brighter than we are. They do it full time. So we can't see what they're seeing. But it seems to us that we prefer to spend a little bit more on labor, knowing that our people will have employment. And when it's time to get it fixed, that they are developing the know-how and have the know-how to get it fixed. After all, we have a bridge across the Demerara River right now that was supposed to last only 25 years. And it has been going because we have local people who fix it, and it was designed with heavy local input. And the gentleman who was a key part of it is still around. And thanks to Moray House, I was able to learn that. I wasn't paying attention to these things in those days. So thanks for presentation that Moray House did. So employment costs are going to be important. And this I'm going to go through very quickly, because all this is saying is that there are options that mean, I'm sure, more to some of the people who are on this forum than I am: regasification of LNG. And there are processes that enable certain things to be done at sea and transfer, for want of the better, transport, thank you, transport those gas to shore by other things other than pipelines. And here is a schedule of what is planned by, oops, I'm not, something is missed. Am I, oh, yes, floating gas production units on order and available as of November 2020, excludes floating LNG and storage units. And you can see here, oops, oops, oops. Sorry if am I blocking something? I'm sure I am. Oops, did I cancel myself? Ah, yes. It says type of unit, total installed on order available, FPSO, barge, etc. So this is what was on order.
Fred,
Are you hearing me?
we've lost the
Screen?
slides. We're hearing
Ah,
you, but we've
okay,
lost the
but
slides.
so let me try again. Are we there now?
Yes.
Great. So what this is saying is how many of these things were, well, I'm not going to risk moving that thing again, but there's a certain amount of business, and they identified Guyana as a location for where some of these things are going. And yes, one of the I must point out, I must make some attribution. This is the source of that information, offshore energy. I'm sure that probably means something to other people on this, but I didn't want to take that information without giving attribution. I want to touch briefly on the fruits of consultation. We seem to be allergic to proper consultation in this country. And if I tend to jump and ramble a bit, excuse me, I had relatively short notice. But here is one of the biggest projects in the Netherlands, and I think it's the Meeskant, and or is it the Meeskrant, whichever. It is a barrier, storm barrier, and when they were about to build it, the fishermen complained. They said, "Look, from what we see of this design, we are not going to be able to get. You're going to be hampering the fish catch," and they were unwilling to do it because, of course, they had to change it. But better sense prevailed, and they did a redesign, and that redesign meant what you're seeing here. And so it is always good to include as wide a consultation from an environmental standpoint, and including the people whose livelihoods are going to be affected. Why is GNIC, I'm going out to one of the longest operating corporations in Guyana. Why is GNIC apparently absent from these plans? As of 2011, it was claimed to be quietly making a huge contribution to the marine industry in Guyana and the Caribbean, and to the energy services and manufacturing sectors as well. Well, I know what I'm going to hear. Oh, GNIC doesn't have the capacity to do so and so. Well, we heard that our insurance industry didn't have the capacity. It was a gross misrepresentation. And if we take these things on the surface, we are never going to have the capacity. And we wrote an article recently, our contribution on that score. But to refocus on GNIC, we cannot understand how GNIC cannot, with a strategic partner, be able to develop skills locally, to be at least, let us say, 20 to 30% of the manufacture of much of this craft, this sea craft that is involved, especially if we are going to choose barges and not a pipeline. Let me see if I can speed it up. We would need linkages to current power infrastructure. I see the current model includes that clearly. But the desk study mentioned that there was a potential for synergies with a regional strategic plan with a neighboring country, Brazil, at least. Apparently, there's a wider plan called the Arco Norte, or Arco Norte, if you want to give the Spanish version, which has in mind a wide plan for transporting of stuff from Brazil through this region, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How is this going to tie into those things? And this is a complex, it ought to be a complex project insofar as those linkages are concerned. And because of that, we are making, we're saying not just, not GNAC, but we are saying that I asked the Institute of Applied Science and Technology, UG in the planning, we should have a national transition strategy. Government has commissioned one, advertised for preparation of one, but government is, of course, and we sympathize with that. They're forced to fly the plane while designing it. But that's their problem to worry about. But it doesn't mean we don't need a strategic plan as early as possible. And we need other people involved. This is very critical as far as TIGI is concerned. We need the Bank of Guyana involved in a committee like that. And we must know that they're involved from finance. The insurance industry, IAG only. We're not talking about the brokers. There's some politics involved with the brokers. Fishing industry, said the university already. Environmental advocates, I mentioned Institute of Applied Scientists, and our economists. There ought to be a committee. You could not, in a private organization from which I come, do a big project and you do not have the a committee from several departments, key departments, exchanging ideas and making sure that so many things are considered when you're going to be exposing your own money. The only people who do this kind of thing are people who are using other people's money and not their own. There ought to be an inter-party consensus, but I don't know if that is possible, but we have got to list it. Because clearly we heard it mentioned today, one of the best consultations we had, the LCDS, how much investment was made in that. And then we had the Green State Development Strategy. We have got to find a way for these parties to have consensus on matters like this. So your summary must fit into a just transition strategy, separate the design, construction, finance, no privatization of benefits and socializing the cost for us, please. It must be capable of being serviced by Guyanese now or in the future, so we can avoid what Mr. Aboud through Mr. Palmer shared. It must reflect the stock of knowledge accumulated and lessons learned over the decades. How are we operating without trying to benefit from the investment that we have made into the Guyanese society? Surely we have learned lessons, as was touched upon before, but Institute of Applied Science would have learned certain lessons they can bring to bear. We are spending 60 billion Guyana dollars in education, multiplied by about 10 years and you get a lot of money. We must really be, we should be looking to see, well, how can we salvage our investment in our people instead of just flying people from outside and doing designs which we are going to have to fly them back again to fix. So I think that you've seen what I have here, and I think I will save some time. Thank you very much, and I'll be here for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you very much. We're going to move on now to our final speaker, Alfred Bhulai, who probably needs very little by way of introduction. Many people will have been reading his letters in the press, the local media. I will let you take it from here, Alfred, with your analysis. Okay. Over to you.
Thanks, Isabel. So I thought that economist was a private economist. I didn't realize it was from the public sector. Is that right? Can you confirm that?
I can't actually. So we were hoping for an economist, and we were also hoping for someone to present from the public sector.
Since I am not a finance person, I am just an engineer and a scientist. While a member of Transparency Institute, the president from whom you just heard, Fred Collins, while a member, we were fishing for information from the government. Let me put up a screen of the kind of information we were looking for. Um, okay, we were looking, we wanted to know about the drilling and extraction of oil. So from the oil well, at a high pressure, the oil has to come up and be decompressed in order to get oil and gas. The decompression releases a lot of gas. As you heard from the first presenter, this gas should really be going back down to build up the pressure so there is no collapse. However, it's being used in a gas to shore operation. There's also water which has to go back. Now, how much gas is coming up is a mystery. We have requested information from the Ministry of Natural Resources, but have never been told how much, what proportion is stored, what proportion is flared, what proportion is vented, and what goes back down. So I'll stop sharing this one and now come to costs. Having fished there and gotten nothing, I tried fishing in the finance area. The first thing that was made public was that the gas to shore operation would cost something like, let me share another screen. We heard that it would cost about 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. A kilowatt hour is the unit of electricity. Now, knowing the amount of, in order to estimate the amount of energy, I did a simple division. Divided the 900 million US dollars that they said it would cost by the cost per kilowatt hour. And you can see over here that capital C is the 900 million US dollars, and the common C is the cost per kilowatt hour. Now that gives us an energy of, just from the 900 million, an energy of 12 billion kilowatt hours. So I worked out how long, a year in kilowatt hours, and tried to figure out how many years this energy would last. And it turns out that this energy from 900 million US dollars would last like 5.8 years. So I looked up further and saw that the gas to shore project, the gas should last about hopefully 25 years. And the lifetime of the operation, the generation, should be also about 25 years. So looking up with the figures available, I looked up the density of the natural gas on the US market, what is known as the lower heating value of the natural gas, and with some figures, assuming there is 42% efficiency to convert from the thermal energy of the natural gas to electrical energy, I came up with about 250 megawatts for the plant. This is exactly what Dr. Jagdeo said. So there was a consistency there. It's consistent with 50 million cubic feet, standard cubic feet of natural gas per day. It works out. However, what doesn't work out, what we don't know, is the capital cost. And this is not being shared with us. So we are forced to speculate what it is really going to cost. Now let me share back one of the slides. This is the official price per kilowatt hour. On the left, they give the heavy fuel oil generation cost per kilowatt hour as 14 US cents per kilowatt hour, and the natural gas estimated cost per kilowatt hour as almost 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. These figures here are pretty consistent at the top. The cost of fuel, well, this is what it seems Exxon is going to charge the government for. We're going to pay for our own gas, as John Palmer was saying. What I didn't figure was the operation and maintenance costs they give us here. Now the capital costs. The capital cost is given as 1 US cent per kilowatt hour. I don't know how they get that. I suspected that I thought the private economist would not want to stake a reputation on things that he doesn't know, and so would pull out. What I didn't know was a public sector economist who would not commit. So here we are, forced to use figures that we don't know how they come up with it. Now GPL, the annual report shows that the infrastructure, the generation facilities, works out at $1 US per watt. $1 US per watt. Per watt, not per energy unit. Now that might be a means of estimating. I'm not sure if they made a mistake here and put 1 US cent per kilowatt hour when they meant $1 US per watt. So these are my misgivings. The main thing is we don't know the capital cost. Now I came up using my figures. I used World Bank lending rates, which I looked up as 7.125% per annum over 25 years, and I came up that with 17 US cents per kilowatt hour. That is what we should be getting from the gas to shore, not the 7 cents. But I don't know where those capital costs, how it's calculated. So this mystery should be explained. And then, not being a professional economist or financial person, I have no reputation to lose. But because of the dearth of information, I am forced to put out this thing in order to make a comparison. I had to do it in order to make a comparison with solar power. Now, my point is that solar power is far, far cheaper. But this mystery here with the capital costs, I can't say. Even so, let us suppose they are right. It's 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. It's still far below the 2 cents per kilowatt hour for solar power. It's still far above. I'm sorry. But I'm not getting the 7 cents. I'm getting something like 17 cents. So what the government has to do is to put out the calculation so that we could know. But that is where I'd like to end. I hope I was being heard somehow.
Yes, thank you, Alfred. So when you're ready, stop sharing your screen, perhaps. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask the panel if they have any questions that they'd like to, amongst themselves, as it were. If there were anything in the presentation that you'd like to query or comment on before we open the floor.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I would just like to comment on this observation that we seem to be buying our own gas from Exxon, because as Mr. Palmer was presenting and he came to that, that was the first question. I was looking to hunt for the contract, a copy of the contract, to see what it said about who owns that gas. So I find that, and I think we still need to go back and see what the contract says, but surely from a base position, all of the resources vest to the people of this country. But that's the only comment I want to make. Thanks.
I don't have any questions because I was particularly enlightened by the other two presenters, and it's pretty consistent with what I already know. Mine is the only questionable one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, in that case, we will go to the floor. I see one hand raised. I'll start with Cal Jaman, if I may. Would you like to ask your question?
Sorry, I actually didn't mean to raise my hand. I was going to type my question, but as I'm on, I was just looking for the data. Qatar, as an example, they're one of the world's leading gas providers, and their cost of gas at the wellhead is, I think, 30 cents US dollars. Qatar has just announced a massive spend to significantly expand its North Shore while simultaneously slashing prices on the international market. So if Guyana has to build a gas business, and the Americans are seeing hell now because their costs are well over $2 at the wellhead. So if Qatar's, cost is 30 cents, it's locking up lucrative contracts with India, China, Australia. It's going to ship gas to, the future. So the big question is, we've got these gas resources. If we can find a way to safely bring it to shore at a cost-effective price, because we might be able to bring it to shore at a cost-effective rate. We might be able to bring it to shore at the right spot. The question is, how do we commercialize it, and can we commercialize it in light of what Qatar's doing? That's that. Thank you.
That info, but is it 30 cents per what? Per kilowatt hour or per BTU?
Per BTU. Yeah. I'll share the article in the chat.
Okay, thank you. There was okay, we'll take, Josh, we'll take your question, and then I think there's one from Mike Prasad in the chat. So go ahead,
okay.
Josh.
Yeah, my question is, when is the Gas to Shore project actually slated to be approved?
So I think if you recall the timeline that I showed in my little presentation at the beginning, and then I think someone else may have touched on it. It was about the middle of next year that, well, it's the middle of next year. I think that they anticipate kind of moving from planning and approval to actual, you know, active phase or construction or whatever that is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Now, there's a comment from Mike Persaud in the chat. Did you want to follow up on that?
Hello, this is Mike Prasad. I must have raised my hand by mistake, but however, thank you. I can get to put in a question here. I think John Palmer said in the first or second slide that the contract seemed to have been dictated to Guyana. There was no negotiation. That's what he said. That's what I read in the slide. And that Mr. Trotman made 2 trips to Houston, and apparently he signed it on his own. A one-man traveled to Houston to Exxon's head office and signed it. But how could a contract be signed and become valid if there had been no negotiation? 33 articles, over 100 clauses. How could such a thing, a one-man signature, and it's now binding on this government of Guyana? I'm sorry, this is a contract or political question, not anything to do with the technical aspects discussed today, but it's very important. On November 30th, Mr. Jagdeo issued what I would call a white paper, and he said, it was issued by DPI, it came out under the byline of Kemal King. He said he will not negotiate this contract. And all of the reasons he gave to me are false reasons, false reasoning. Can somebody speak to this question? Thank you.
I don't know if there's anyone in the panel who would like to take that on. It's a little left field from where we are now, but John, would you like to?
What I can say is what I've read in the press. 5 ministers went twice to Texas. The contract was apparently discussed at cabinet level, and former Minister Trotman said he was instructed by the cabinet to sign the document. And the cabinet did consist at that time, it did include at that time 5 lawyers. So I'm sure Guyanese would expect that 5 lawyers in the cabinet would have looked intensively at the clauses in the contract. Mr. Trotman was under the impression that it was little different from the prospection contract of 1999. But if you remember, accountant Christopher Ram, who also has a postgraduate qualification in laws surrounding oil and gas, pointed out in his 95-part series, towards the beginning of that great long series, that many of these articles are really quite defective in the sense that they really do not represent the best interest of Guyana. But as a foreigner, of course, I really could not comment on this subject further, only what I have read in the press. Thank you.
Okay. I think Chris is actually in the audience. Chris, did you want to add to that, or was it a separate question?
I don't mind. Thank you very much as well, and greetings to everyone. I don't mind adding to that. I think it's very important, and I've been pleading with persons that the Clyde and Company report is extremely revealing and instructive. In fact, it might even have been an attempt by Raphael Trotman to exonerate himself and probably place the responsibility, although he did sign, someone else, but I would say that we need to examine that Clyde and Company report. It's an engagement that was contracted by Raphael Trotman, and it tells a very damning and troubling story about how matters were done. We've heard about people saying that, yes, it went before cabinet. I am not even certain at this point that that is true. In fact, I think there's a 50-50 chance that it's not true. On the question, so I want to say, I really do believe, and Isabel, if you would like me, I do have that Clyde and Company report, at least a significant portion of it, without the appendices. If you would like me to send that to you for you to share with all the persons interested in this matter who subscribe one way or the other to Moray House Trust, then I would certainly do so. I'll do so in any case.
Thank you.
On the question of the agreement relating to oil and gas, there's a specific article, article number 12, associated and non-associated gas. And that requires a feasibility study that the contractor shall carry out. Shall carry out. That makes it mandatory. There's no certainty that that in fact has been done. So that's one point I'd like to make. The other point I'd like to make is in relation to gas, whether associated or non-associated gas. Sorry. The contract, the agreement, and this is Article 11, cost recovery and production sharing, deals both with gas. It talks about cost oil and cost gas. And that is also subject to the 50-50 arrangement. The other point that I think is necessary for us to bear in mind, and I go back to Article 12C, if the contractor believes improved terms are necessary for the development of excess associated gas, excess being the gas not used in the production of oil, petroleum, the party shall carry out friendly negotiations in a timely manner to find a new solution to the utilization of said excess associated gas and reach an agreement in writing. Now, none of these things are taking place. And you correctly said in your opening statement that this is by many factors the largest agreement ever entered into on behalf of the people of Guyana. It's 5 times that of Skeldon. So let's set aside for now whether the agreement is in its entirety or partly unlawful, whatever. Surely the agreement as has been signed ought to be followed, and that's the none of us knows whether that's happening. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, a call came in and I thought I might be cut off. Yes. None of us can say, because we've not been told, whether or not the articles of this agreement are being complied with. I heard about information being sought, and again, I keep saying, we as a people must try to explore our rights under the Access to Information Act, because if we don't get, then we may be able to take other approaches to get information on matters that are so critical to our welfare. So my contribution is that I'm not sure that many of the things that ought to happen, even under a flawed agreement, are in fact happening.
Right.
That Exxon has done what it's supposed to have done, whether they're these friendly negotiations that have been described in Article 12, whether any of that has taken place, the framework under which it is taking place, whether it's any different from the discussions that might have gone on under the APNU administration with the signing of this 2016 agreement. That's my contribution, Isabel.
Okay, thank you very much. John, did you want to come in on the back of that?
Thank you. Yes, just briefly to respond. Of course, when the contract was being written and signed, it was not known whether any of the wells being drilled by and for Exxon would be purely gas wells, purely oil wells, or a mixture. And so far, at least as declared by Exxon, the wells have been either dry, non-commercial, or have been oil producers. The Qatar fields, the giant Qatar fields, are gas fields. They're not oil producing fields. So although it was prudent for Exxon to ensure that in the PSA of 2016, there's mention of associated and non-associated gas, at the moment, the agreement is being operated as if it's for only associated gas. This still raises this extraordinary case where Exxon says, yes, we have got spare gas, but at the same time, we are pumping everything back into maintaining reservoir pressure. And it's this inconsistency which troubles me. Just to follow up on what Chris Ram said about the Clyde Company report, yes, the main report is available, but the vital annexes are not available. And those are the ones which people really need to, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, John. There's a comment in the feed from Dr. Jailal that I'll just mention. I think we've got Mr. Patterson with us this afternoon. And it's about the discussion of this issue in Parliament and whether any parliamentary action can lead to full disclosure of the data. I don't know if you'd like to come in on this, Mr. Patterson.
Hello, good night, Isabel. Are you hearing me?
Hi, yes, we are. Thank you.
Yes, apologies. I won't be putting on my video. I'm actually sitting in my backyard.
That's okay. It's allowed.
Right. Thank you and good night to all your presenters. I found it very interesting, as usual. Panel discussion. On the question of parliamentary position, I mean, I would have submitted a motion at the beginning of this parliament, which is in October, I think on October the 10th, for the parliament to debate this particular project, and it called for several studies to be laid in the Committee of Natural Resources, which I do think is the right place to go, and it should have public consultations and all the new studies and everything should be laid there. Unfortunately, about 2 months, it hasn't been approved as yet. Obviously, for a motion to be debated in Parliament, if the Speaker has to approve it. I was informed about this week, Monday, that he's inclined to approve the motion if I omit certain clauses, particularly the clause asking for the examination, the costs, and some other clauses in the motion. I've written him back to ask why, so I'm waiting that. But generally, I do think that, as you are right, the Parliament is the place for us to have a discussion on it. And then I would like it to go to the Natural Resources Committee. And when it goes there, they can, like any other bill, when motion, the public and stakeholders can make their intervention there. So hopefully it will be approved for debate. Of course, the tyranny in the numbers, if it is supported or not, that's another hurdle to be crossed. Thank you.
Yes, I did try to extend an invitation to members of the Natural Resources, the sectoral committee, to join this panel, or to join the discussion anyway. The website doesn't have a functioning address. It's very difficult to actually contact members of parliament. Yes, clearly we weren't successful. But it is a bit of a worry as to what is actually how much substantive debate, because this was a comment from one of the technocrats that I approached, that, well, of course, Parliament is the place for these discussions, but it's not clear how substantive a debate is taking place in Parliament. So that is then a concern again. But anyway, thank you for contributing there. Now, I did have, Mr. Lithcott, you did have your hand raised, and I'm sorry it took a while to come round to you. Was there a question that you had, or has it since been answered?
No, I'm going to go a bit off field, but what I want to discuss is not really appropriate for this. So it involves this subject. I don't think it's appropriate for this discussion. So I decided to let it pass. Thank you very much. Okay, no problem. Darsh, do I see you with another question?
Yeah, sorry, don't need. Coming back to the discussion in Parliament, and earlier, Isabel, in the intro, you mentioned right now the government is very silent. You know, we at OGGN have experienced a lot of problems getting any information from them. We've written letters directly to them. We put letters in the paper, etc. They're all being ignored. So in terms of outside of the debate in Parliament and outside of, in civil society, since this will, as you said, might be approved next summer, what can civil society do? Is EITI useful at all? Is ESCAR-Zoo useful at all? You know, what would you think that, you know, leading up to next summer's approval, what do you think that civil society could do to get our voices heard?
I'm going to defer first to the panel there, I think. Fred, did you have a response to that?
No, not with regard to ESCAR-Zoo, because we are trying to establish as much as possible to plumb the ESCAR-Zoo for what it's worth. We published some articles on it, and we are told that ESCAR-Zoo is different in that it has legal redress or legal mechanisms that we can deploy, but nobody is telling us exactly how. I guess our legal friends are still trying to figure it out. So that's all I can tell you. I had my hand up for another reason, so I want to let you have the question answered first.
Sure. I mean, from a sort of Moray House Trust perspective, our answer would be more panels, not just obviously us, but you know, all the concerned organizations out there. I think we cannot discuss this too much. There is no such thing as a surfeit of debate, and maybe that will then generate a little momentum and encourage those in public office to maybe take part a little bit more in these debates. John, were you going to come in on that issue?
Yes, I was. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do have in other working lives some considerable experience of organizations which engage, as they say, in consultation. They receive a lot of feedback and then become unable to respond because whereas they were hoping they would get a uniform response, they get a diverse response. And the people organizing consultations often aren't trained to deal with a diversity of responses. And it may very well be that, or it may be, that this is the same problem in the government of Guyana, that people know how to put out a consultation. We can do a survey monkey. We can see how many people in which sort of category give what kind of answer. But how do we actually respond when we have opposing points of view? This calls for the people running consultations to be trained in how to respond. And I suspect that training is somewhat deficient here. And I notice that it doesn't apply only in oil and gas. You notice that ERM, as the environmental consultancy employed consistently by Exxon, has also been totally silent, having been engaged in these various public consultations, but not responding to any of the questions. It's been asked to do so, and it hasn't done so. So I think this is quite a point where you could reasonably ask for training of the people organizing consultations. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is it a Mr. Marsh? Did you have a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So early in Mr. Collins' presentation, oh, by the way, good evening all. He alluded to that using technology, technology-driven solution for the gas to show project may not order well for us because we always will need to keep flying in people to fix it. I just wanted some clarity on that point, one. And two, if it's like in the affirmative, I wonder if a solution of a train and transfer scenario may be a better approach. Yes, we have the latest technology. Yes, it's technology in driven, but it's done in such a way where we have locals trained from apprenticeship to PhD who can then transition into running the plant. All right, so those are two questions. I have one more, but if time permit.
Okay, I'm going to ask Fred to weigh in.
Yes, what I was trying to say is that, and I think I used the word sacrifice. Even if we had to sacrifice some of the higher technology in order to ensure that we had a design that was going to allow for more of our own people to be part of the solution, part of the configuration, part of the well, to make it plain, part of the proceeds of the, then we should do so, because what is happening in the world, as you know, is that technology is threatening to put all of us, those of us who still have a working life, out of a job. And I don't believe that we have worked this thing out properly. But what we do need to work out is that if we have a choice where it's going to be 12 units of technology and 0 of labor, to opt for 11 units of technology and 5 of labor. If you get my point, we cannot have a situation where we are simply choosing solutions which benefit the people outside of Guyana and leaving ourselves undone. How are we going to survive? You get what I'm saying? So that is
Please.
Sorry?
Can I just frame what I said a little differently?
Yes.
Now, I understand. Let me probably give you a quick context, and it will start like this. I'm the Google developer lead for Guyana, right? I work with AI systems. I work with companies. One of my colleagues done work for Barclays Bank. 25 million active users using AI system built by Guyanese. So there are Guyanese who are being trained to do that 12 parts of technology. There are Guyanese who are educating themselves, who are getting experiences in the region and further afield, all the way as far as Germany. So for me, I have absolutely no disagreement with including all 12 technology. What I want us to focus on is, yes, bring the technology, but there must be a transfer of skills scenario and regime that ensures, one, if you're going to automate the entire thing, that Guyanese are trained, one, as developers, two, as system admin, and then three, as operators for the particular application. And even if it means that there are less Guyanese employees physically on the plant, you have enough local talent pool, whether it be in partnership with the University of Guyana, etc., to have your local persons, whether the developers or system admins, to be able to be those local technology guys. So I don't think we should be apprehensive or fearful of the kind of technology and the systems, and whether it be a SCADA system like you see in Qatar or you see in UAE. I don't think we should be too fearful of that. But I think we should put regimes in place to ensure that whatever solution that is brought us, we insist from a contractual standpoint. I know Mr. Ram and all those persons who have legal background here could guide on this, that our people are trained to take over. You understand? And most importantly, I will end on this point, some level of direct mentorship program is in play. Yeah? Thank you.
All right, let me respond quickly that you clearly get my concern, which is that Guyanese must be part of the action. So whether in that way or else, but there's one other element that I want to address from what you're saying. Now, this is why we are saying we need an interdisciplinary group at the planning stage. I don't know how transitory these jobs that you are talking about are, and you'll forgive me, I'm 71 years old. You are obviously a younger person and you probably have a better fix on it. We have had situations where people come and set up shops, that it's closed or whatever. The next thing you know, it's gone because of the new WTO rules from the GATT and so on. In terms of the work that GNIC is doing in terms of fabrication, it seems to me we are always going to be having a need for jobs of fabrication. So what I'm saying is two things. One, you have to write, and you are correct that I would support what you are talking about, where you are in the technology business and you're able to add value, you're part of a programming group, AI, whatever. I'm saying, I'm going a little further than that. I'm saying while that is so, I would prefer that there be an interdisciplinary group of people who are looking not only at what is existing now, but in terms of, for heaven's sake, we're talking about a change from fossil fuel in the first place over to something else. We're talking about the transition. That is what we're talking about. So we don't know, we have to have, as much as is humanly possible, a vision in 20 or 30 years' time, what are likely to be the jobs that are still going to be around, that people are still going to be involved in, and how to keep our people trained, reskilling them, etc. What are the chances? So that's what I'm talking about. Yes, present, fine, but we have got to also address transition and into the future.
Okay, on that point, we see eye to eye, and I agree with you there, because that's why I asked for clarification and then context, because in that way, if there's a multidisciplinary community and committee, what we can do is those of us who have experience working with the big four companies or in different parts of the world, we can contribute and say, okay, you would need some skills in understanding SCADA systems. They're run on this, the language used to develop them is X. They communicate on Y. they usually use this kind of encryption. So when you are doing, let's say, a degree program or master's degree program or PhD program, you need to have these skills, because in X amount of time, when Siemens, when whoever implements this system in Guyana is running on this language, this is the model controller, etc., we now prepare the next couple batch of technologists to be able to transition. So yes, in that case, we need the different sectoral committees on board, even including the telecommunications companies, who would have to facilitate the communication for these systems. So yeah, that's fair, and I firmly agree with you. I just needed context on what you're saying. Sorry about that, Isabel.
No problem, thank you. And just to actually remind everyone that, of course, the Japanese study did suggest not using a pipeline and actually having the floating platforms onto which the gas would be extracted and then relayed by some other means onshore. So it isn't the pipeline isn't a foregone conclusion. And I think that for many reasons, there could perhaps have been a bit more debate about which option we chose to pursue. Now we're running, we're coming towards the end. There are two, there was one person, Mr. Modeste, had his hand raised for a long time, and there's a question in the chat from Mr. Bagarat. So Mr. Modeste, would you like to ask your question or make your comment quite brief, please?
Yes, thank you very much to all the panelists. I think it's a very informative presentation. The question I had was related to, some of the information that has been missing. So even with all the details of, things like the parameters for the design and operation of the FPSOs or the gas to shore not being there, and given what we know about some of the agreements or concessions that have been made by the various governments in place, things like tax giveaways, lack of ring fencing, awarding of more blocks than was legally permitted to single entities, what can the panelists share with us about the potential revenue left on the table just from those actions and others like it?
Would anyone like to try and answer that?
What I'm trying, I'd like to get some clarity. I didn't quite understand. I heard him refer to the extra blocks, and he seemed to be mentioning going in the direction of what can be perhaps salvaged or what would legal action. Could he explain what exactly is the question he's asking?
So we gave away several tax concessions. Those have a monetary value. We also failed to do things like ring fencing appropriately. That has a monetary value. I'm trying to just see if you guys can give us your assessment of the, let's say, the magnitude of that amount of value that has been potentially lost by us missing those things, just without even looking at what we would be missing from the other things that, like some paying for gas that we own, etc.
Well, I would only say that if you look at our articles, TIGI's articles, you would see that we attempted to put a minimum monetary value to what was lost. For example, when we did our first article in 2018, what was the comparable signing bonus that was paid when there was a proper auction, a bidding system, as Brazil normally does? We compare that. We also, in our more recent articles, we mentioned the fact that the ring fencing. The absence of ring fencing would have been mitigated had those blocks been issued instead of one super block, 6 blocks, and that was generous. But because it would not have occurred to anyone that, well, even Exxon, it wouldn't have occurred to attempt to claim the expenses of one license against an entirely different license. And so it would have mitigated to some extent what we have now in terms of the lack of ring fencing, because you can, in that super block, apparently you can claim expenses from one well across to any other well. And we attempted to point out these things, and we did put a monetary, or we did imply that a lot of losses, but we, in order to quantify that, I think you had to deal with, you had to do much more analysis than we were capable of doing. You had to get down to some probability theory, and you had to know much more about the oil industry. What I will end by saying that in terms of the insurance proceeds, we put a value. We said that it was, from our calculation, we forgot to mention over the period, 10 years, I think it was, we had in mind that we would lose about 2 billion, $1 billion US over a period of 10 years from all classes of insurance that would not be flowing into our economy. And that was only when we did that analysis, we only had about 1 or 2 wells. So that what you're talking about is a huge amount of money. That's all we can say at this point. It is not trivial, a huge amount of money.
And actually, just out of interest, I think it was Chris Ram who, in both cases, identified the ring fencing and the supersized block as problems that we were going to that we will carry with us into the future in his early series that John referred to. I'm going to ask the members of our panel to make their closing remarks, because we're nudging now the 2-hour mark, which is the duration of our panel events. But I'm going to ask Mr. Palmer. So one of the questions in the chat from Mr. Bagarat is, could we get Mr. Palmer to share his thoughts on the impact of seismic effects, cost, safety, environmental on the pipeline? And this in furtherance of his statement on the non-fixation of the line. So John, would you like to lead off with your closing remarks and find some clever way to incorporate a comment on that?
Seismic problems are indeed considered in the ERM massive consultancy. You probably know that these are not just hundreds of pages, these are thousands of pages, and I am slowly plowing through them. There's a lot in there, but the gaps are what really makes this thing interesting. And I do hope that more Guyanese will delve into these and will think about, does this make sense? What are they not telling me? For example, just to give one example, a great deal of attention is given to identifying how you lay out the moorings of the FPSO so that it doesn't interfere with the structures you've got on the seabed, and allows you to do what's called vertical seismic profiling, which is firing sound waves down into the reservoirs to find out where it is, where the pockets are, and what's the most efficient way of getting at them. So the ERM report goes into this in considerable and very illuminating detail. There's another aspect of seismic surveying, and that's the broader scale. And you probably have read that Exxon is proposing to go for 3D and 4D, that is multiple seismic surveys, where they're towing not in the existing area, but outside the existing area, looking for new prospects. And what are the seismic effects of those big towed arrays on whales. And so far as I can see, the people who are doing these broad scale seismic surveys don't have to either report a proposed project summary, nor do they have to get an EIA. And yet we know from the world literature that these big seismic surveys produce intense and desperately loud sounds, which are deafening to whales and disrupt whale communication. And so far as I can see, this is not touched on at all in the EIAs which have been produced so far for Exxon in the case of the Stabroek Tract. So that should be a worry for Guyanese, that yes, it's covered in part, but the big questions are not being covered. So you have to look very carefully. Thank you.
The devil's in the detail. Thank you.
The devil is indeed in the detail.
Alfred, would you like to make any closing remarks? Did you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I hope I can be heard now. My closing remarks is that we need information and we're not getting it. And therefore, we should get sufficient information so all the financial people would be able to examine what is happening and whether the figures are correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Fred, did you have any closing thoughts?
Yes, please. One, it is all well and good to say that the government officials are silent and we're not getting information. Unfortunately, so are the professionals who are not government people, and a lot of the our lawyers and so on, because we have made what should have been startling accusations, meaning TIGI has made those accusations. We have, for example, pointed out that the question about whether the minister had the authority to issue those 60 blocks on the one license has now been settled as a consequence of the of another case, which is the elections case by the CCJ, where they discussed clearly the issue of unfettered discretion, that it does not exist. And that is what people were relying on to tell us that the minister had the authority. Although, and although we pointed out that we didn't do the legal analysis, we simply lazily, economically, perhaps is a better word, looked at the court decisions in that regard, and all of them were in a straight line for 100 years. Somebody pointed out 300 years that there's no such thing, and that the minister had a duty to confine her decision-making within a certain context. And all we have gotten is a big, fat silence for all of these lawyers that we have within the society. All of that is not the only thing we said. That on the way to this year, there are certain things, a history that was contrived. Because when we check certain facts, they don't line up. What we have gotten? Silence. And so there seems to be a conspiracy of silence that reaches wide and deep within the society. It is not just the politicians. So unless we recognize that there's something fundamentally wrong with our society, we're going to keep banging away at the politicians alone. They are professionals who know. All of them have not died yet. They know what transpired. And they can get somebody to say what transpired. So I'm saying that that is a very, we have to be complete. It is not just the politicians that are silent, government people, the people in civil society and professionals are also silent in the face of this, what should be startling accusations that TIGI has made. I would say further to finish, because I can keep talking for a long time. In terms of the transition that we need to look, this thing is a horrendously complex decision-making regime that is demanded by oil and gas. Some of us want to make it more complicated than it really is in other places. But in terms of the relationship, the linkages with employment, the regional thrusts in Latin America, et cetera, as we've seen those, it is horrendously complex. And we need to ensure that we recognize that the kind of simplicity that we are seeing something is fundamentally wrong with it as well. I get what is called the transition dialogues daily from Brazil. Of course, that's a much more complex society, but every day they call it the transition dialogues. What is happening on this front? How they're moving from so and so to so and so. I'm saying that to say that this kind of simple thing where a man is still going in a corner, or two people prodding him to go in this direction, and then visiting a whole project like this on the country, this cannot work. And unless civil society recognizes that there's a huge absence of certain things and is prepared to look at them, we are going to be in trouble. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That seems a fairly good note to end on. Thank you very much to our speakers, to our panel, and thank you also to the audience. Thank you for an interesting selection of questions. Apologies to those who weren't able to ask maybe all of the questions that they wanted to, but I think we've now been going probably long enough. This is a huge topic, and we won't begin to cover it all in one panel. We've had the sort of civil society response in this panel. I think we will go on in future to try and have a little bit more technical analysis, maybe some environmental input, and hopefully we will be able to find an economist or two to give their thoughts on it. So that's how we propose to continue in the new year. Thank you again for joining us. If you are new to these discussions and would like to be informed of future events that we hold, please email us at morayhousetrust@gmail.com and ask to be added to our mailing list. I think it just remains for me to now wish you all a very good evening and enjoy the beginning of the Christmas season. Okay, thank you again. Thank you to the panel, thank you to the audience, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you too.